Okay, so right off the bat, today we're gonna cover functions a little bit. I'm gonna show you the solution to week 5 homework, so that you can see how I did that, and then we're gonna do a bunch of exercises using arrays. Okay, I have decided to take the second problem for week 6, so week 6B, and I've pushed that so it's going to be due at the end of spring break, along with the week 7 assignment. So just to give you guys a little extra time. I think that we haven't really had a lot of opportunity to practice on parallel arrays, and so I don't want to get ahead of that. And so if you've already done it, then great. If not, you have a little extra time to work on it.
Yeah, I'm like a week or two behind, but that's
Okay.
I'll spend spring break, like I said, just playing catch up.
Okay, so this weekend 6A is due Sunday at 11:59, and 6B will be due the Sunday at the end of spring break, along with the week 7 rock paper scissors assignment. The rock paper scissors assignment is going to take you some time, so don't wait until Saturday at the end of spring break to start.
Gotcha.
All right. That is the most complex problem we've had to date. Okay. Let's do the week 5 assignment. So the week 5 assignment was this. It is to write a program that asks the user to enter 5 integer test scores. Use a loop to capture each of the 5 scores. The program should display a letter grade for each score as it is entered. Once all 5 scores are entered, display the average test score and the corresponding letter grade. Okay? So great. So we're going to use a function as follows: determine grade. The function should accept a test score as an argument and return a letter grade for the score as a string using this grade scale. Okay? Use pseudocode. And then here I gave you a sample output, which is what I had. So this was just as a guide. Your solution did not have to match this one. Okay? All right. So let's just go ahead and do that implementation. So first thing we do is we'll start a REPL. And I'm just going to do week 5 homework solution. So I'm just going to do the pseudocode in the REPL. Are you guys using since we're not doing flowcharts anymore, you can switch over to do your pseudocode using Google Docs. Might actually be easier than doing that in Google Drawing, since you don't need them.
It was just mine was just fitting the flowchart with everything that was
right. But we won't be doing, we're not going to do much flowchart work from here on out. So if you want to switch to Google Doc instead of drawing, that might make the flowcharts easier, or that might make the pseudocode easier rather. So was that?
Still want to download as a PDF.
Yeah, it still needs to be submitted as a PDF with a link to the C#. Pro tip is that you can change the REPL after you send me the link, right? That link, but once you submit the PDF, your pseudo is fixed.
As
So
long as you update the correct answer onto that.
that's right. So, so you can even if you get past the deadline, and you haven't that REPL isn't finished. If you submit the link on your PDF, that stops the clock on the due date, and then you can then you can keep working on that REPL, because once I'll go to the link, probably hours after I don't grade anything at 12:01 on Monday morning, so you'll have time after that to keep working on it if you need more time. But submit it by 11:59. Submit the PDF and the link by 11:59. Yes. Okay. So here we go. So first thing we're going to do is pseudocode. Begin main. So if we go back and look at the assignment, I'm just reading it, and it says I need to ask the user to enter 5 integer test scores. So I'm gonna have to have a loop. So my input section of my main module is going to be a loop that asks for a test score. Right. The processing section of that is going to be to send the test score to my determine grade module and get back a letter grade, and then my output section will be to print it out, and then I'll have all that inside a loop, And then once the loop is over, I'll do an average calculation on those scores. Okay? So we did averages and sums and in the week 4 assignment. So we already knew how to do that, right, with collecting user input and doing an average and a sum. So we already had some experience there. And then the determined letter grade looks just like an if statement, a range check if statement. Okay? So here we go. So begin main. I'm gonna write my code. I'm gonna come back and put my declares in. So I'm just gonna put a line here for declare, and I'll come back and fill those in as I figure out what I want there. Okay. So first thing first, I'm gonna do a for loop for counter equals 1 to 5. Okay. And then here in my loop, I'm going to say display enter a test score. What did my prompt look like? The prompt said enter grade 1, enter grade 2. Okay. So this will be enter grade, and then I'll have the counter after that. Okay. And then I do input, and I'll just call it grade. Okay. And then I'll say set letter equals determine grade. I'll send the grade. Right? Is that the right name for the function? Determine grade. Should accept a test score as an argument and return a letter grade for the score as a string. Okay. And then I'm going to do display a grade of grade is an equals, what does the message say? A number grade of 100 has a letter grade of A. Okay. A number grade of the grade has a letter grade of letter. Okay. And that is unfortunately on 2 lines. Okay. And then that's it. Then we're going to do N4. Right? So let me go back and do my declares. So I need an integer, declare integer counter and grade. Okay. And I need to declare string letter. Okay. Okay, so that's my for loop there. So now at the end, I'm going to do, after my for loop, I'm going to say average equals sum divided by 5. And then I'm going to say display your average, what is the, it says the average is 88 and has a letter grade of B. So the average is average and has a letter grade of letter. Okay. And then here I'm going to want to do this again, where I'm going to say set letter equals determine grade average, right? And this here I need a set there. Okay. And I think that's it, right? That's the end of my main. And now I need to do a few more declarations. I need to declare as a real for average. I also need apparently I have a sum, because I'm using sum here, but I haven't defined it yet. So I'll go ahead and declare that. And then also here, in my for loop, I'm going to come back and say sum plus equals, set sum plus equal grade. Okay, there's my pseudo. Is that right, do we think? That seems pretty right to me. What was that? You still following along?
Yeah.
So a couple of points. I mean, I'd like to point out as I'm writing the pseudo that, I didn't necessarily start at the top. I mean, I started at the top of my for loop and wrote that. I came back and put in the declares after I was done. I didn't try to figure out everything that I was going to need to declare at the beginning. I kind of let the variables come out as I was writing the pseudo, and then I went back and declared them later. I went back and edited the sum part in. So you don't have to solve the problem in the order that the user is going to experience it, right? You can solve the problem in the order that makes sense to you and that's easiest for you to do. So I tried to do whole features of the process. I tried to get the whole for loop prompting for 5 grades and get that done. Then I said, okay, let's do the average at the end. And then I went, and now what do I have to do to support that average calculation? So I'm kind of doing my pseudocode in those individual features or individual behaviors of the program rather than trying to do them all at once. Okay? That's very deliberate because I don't want to have to think about all the problems at the same time. As these programs become more and more complicated, you want to be able to just focus on one problem at a time. Let me get a for loop to prompt the user. Let me get a while loop in here to do something until a sentinel value ends. Okay? So, and then go back and fill in, okay, now that I know that my sentinel works and my while loop will bail out, let me go back and then put in the contents of the while loop and make it do something. Okay? So I can solve the problem in steps, and I don't have to try to focus on the whole problem at once. I can break it down into smaller chunks. Okay? You do, yes. So that's a good point. So because in C#, because I'm doing this plus equal grade, in order for that to work, you have to initialize sum. Now in pseudocode, you don't have that requirement, right? So, but in C# we're going to have to initialize that sum to 0. Okay. In pseudocode, we can say I'm declaring an integer counter, grade, and sum, and we just know that those are initialized to 0 by default because they're integer data type. Okay. But in C#, because we're using the plus equal, we're required to assign that variable and a starting value. Okay, so now let's do begin function string determine grade, and it takes one parameter, which is an integer. Okay. Now here I just have a big if statement. If this is a range check, okay? If grade greater than or equal to 90, if grade is greater than or equal to 90, then what? Return A.
Is it wrong to say return grade A?
Return grade A? How like what?
Like return grade?
Just like grade A?
Well, not in the parentheses, but just like if, for instance, like
Like that?
I declared letter grade instead of just grade, so I wrote return letter grade equals A.
So if you say so that is not correct. Okay, so if you return letter grade equals A, okay, then so now that is not going to work because letter grade equals A is an assignment statement. Okay, and it does not have a value. So return what does letter grade equal A evaluate to? It doesn't evaluate to anything. So you can't return it because it doesn't have a result. Okay, it's an assignment statement. So what you're returning is essentially the right side of that assignment statement. So I don't want the left side because I'm not storing the value A in the variable letter grade. I just want to return it. So I only want the right side of my expression. Okay, the left side is used to store the result of the expression. It's usually a variable name, and in this case, I don't want that. I just want to return the value, right? A. Okay. So now here I can do, I have two options here, okay? I could do just another if statement like this. Okay, I can do that because once I hit that return A in line 21, the function is over, right? So the rest of the if statements won't run, okay? So here, because I can bail out there on that if statement and be done. Alternatively, I could do an else statement here where I could say else if, okay? And I can run all of these, okay? In this case, because I have a return statement inside each then clause, they're going to run the same number of steps, okay? Either with separate if statements or with the else, either way, in this case, they're identical.
So you could run 5 if statements?
I could write 5 standalone if statements, or I could write an if else block with 4 elses and a default, okay?
Which would be more simpler? Which would you do?
I would write the 5 if statements simply because it's just, to me, that's just easier to read.
Yeah.
And I get hung up in all the else's and all that, and so.
And I did it just from less than 60 and working my way.
Yeah, so if you want to do, so you could do it backwards and do less than 60 is equals an F, and as long as your range checker is going in the right order, then and you're checking the most restrictive conditions first. Greater than or equal to 70. Then when I sent you an example, Desiree, how did I do it? Did I do else's in the one I sent you? Do you remember? I don't know that it really matters, but right now the 5 if statements just feel better to me. Who knows how I would feel if I did this tomorrow? So then here, my default here is just return F because I don't need an if statement at the end because it's just everything else. Okay.
But from the question, the range of this course,
Mm-hmm.
first one was greater than 90. Second one should be between 80 and 89.
Right.
But if grade is greater than 80, that means it's already into 90.
Yes. So this, if I just have this range check here, if it's greater than or equal to 80, so if I entered 95 as the grade, right? 95 is greater than or equal to 80, but because I put this if statement first, greater than or equal to 90, I hit the return statement and my function is over. Okay? So if grade is a 95, this statement runs, and I hit the return statement, this statement never runs. Okay? Because the function is over because I hit a return statement. As soon as you hit a return statement, the function ends. No more code runs.
Is that just because of the order of it?
The return statement ends the function. Okay? And because I put the if statements in a specific order so that this condition is more restrictive, greater than or equal to 90 is more restrictive than greater than or equal to 80. Okay, so I'm checking the more restrictive conditions first. Okay, so alternatively, I could have gone backwards. I could have said less than or equal to 60, or less than 60 is an F, less than or equal to 69. Okay, and I could have gone backwards, and then used less than and started with the low numbers. It's the same result, right? Okay, so there's my pseudo. Okay. So let's go ahead and start writing. So I'm going to just copy this part. I'm not going to copy the declare statements. I'm going to do the translation now, okay, into C#. I'm not going to copy the declare statements because I'll just declare my variables as I get to them, okay. So then I'm just going to paste that into my main method, okay, and then I'm just going to start translating, okay. So first things first, I need a for statement. For int counter equals 1, counter less than or equal to 5, counter plus plus. Okay. Here I want to make sure I get 5 values, so I could do 1 through 5, 0 to less than 5, 1 to less than or equal to 5. You know, so in this case, because I want to actually display the counter in the message, I'm going to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as my counters. Okay. As long as I get 5 of them is really the important thing. Okay. And then we say console.writeLine, enter a grade. Whoops, no, it says enter grade. We'll say number, and then we'll use our new interpolation function format that we learned there. Okay. If you're going to use this inline interpolation, then you need to have this dollar sign symbol outside the quotes. Okay, right here. Okay. All right. So then we're going to say int grade equals, and we just use our convert.2and32 console.readline. Okay. How many times have we written that statement? No. At least once in every assignment for 6 weeks. Okay. So now I'm to this point in my pseudo. Okay. So the next thing is set letter equals to determine grade. Okay. So it's going to be string letter equals determine grade. Well, that's a terrible spelling. And I send the grade as an argument. Okay. And then I do a write line. We'll use our string number grade has a letter grade of letter. Okay. All right. So for now, let's just try to run this, okay? Because I've typed a bunch of code here, and I want to run it and make sure that I've got my syntax correct. I haven't made any spelling mistakes, okay? So I get an error that says the name determined grade does not exist in the current context, which is the error I would want because I'm calling a function here, okay? But I haven't defined it yet, okay? But I didn't get any other errors, so I didn't get any unexpected symbol or missing semicolon or things like that. So I didn't make any other mistakes. I just need to define the method. Now, what I want to do here is I want to get this loop running, okay? And so I want to make sure that the loop is executing 5 times and I'm getting my inputs and my outputs right, okay? So I'm going to just stub determine grade. I'm not going to finish implementing it right now. I'm just going to stub it so that we can keep working on the rest of the code, okay? So remember that I said when you stub a method, what you do is you create just the signature and the minimum amount of code required just to get the code to compile. Okay. So in this case, we just need the signature, and we have to return a string of some kind. Okay. So I'm just gonna do the least that I can do there. Now I start by making sure that my new method is inside my main class, but not inside the main method. Okay. So I want to make sure that I put it in the class at the right point. So I find the end of the class here, which is at line 52 currently, and I'm going to put my new method right before that. Okay. Public static. What's the return type of determined grade? It's a string, right? It's called determined grade. And what kind of parameter does it take? An integer parameter, and int. It's called grade, and there's only one. Okay. Now, if I were to run this right now, I get an error that says main class determined grade. Not all code paths return value. Okay. What this is telling me is that because I've declared a return type of determined grade right here as a string, okay, there has to be a return statement inside determined grade. It won't compile without it. Okay. And this compiler is also smart enough to know that if you've got an if statement and there's a return inside the if statement, that there's got to be something outside of the if statement too, right? So the compiler is going to be checking to make sure that that you're always going to hit a return statement in there. Okay, so in this case, I'm just doing a stub, so I'm just going to return a lowercase x there, just because I don't want to work on that yet. I want to go back and finish my main method. Okay, so now when I run it, I get enter grade 1. Okay, a number grade of 3 has a letter grade of x. Okay, so enter grade 4, enter grade 5. Okay, and then my program ends. Okay, so my loop is running. I'm running 5 times, and I have a good output here where I'm parroting back the number grade I entered, and I'm getting back the value of x from determined grade. I haven't done the translation yet, but I'm getting something back, right? So I know that all the plumbing in my main method is correct, right? So I'll come back later and do the if statement in determined grade. Okay. So now, what was that?
So
I'm about to do the sum right now. Right. Okay. Right. So now here I've done. I'm back in my main method. Okay, and I haven't finished yet. I've finished the for loop, and I finished the user input. Okay, I haven't calculated the sum or the average, and I'm not actually calculating the grade, but I've got some structure working in there. Okay, so now I'm going to come back and finish another feature. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to calculate the average. Okay, so in my pseudocode that starts here. So in my pseudocode I've done display enter grade, input grade, set letter equals determine grade, do the output message. I'm going to do the sum, and then I'm going to put the average calculation after my for loop. Okay, so right here inside my for loop, I can say sum plus equal grade. Okay, and here I need to make sure that I initialize sum to 0. Okay, in order for that to work. See, if I leave this out, if I just say int sum and I hit run, then I get an error and it says use of unassigned local variable sum. Okay, because I just defined it here. I didn't give it a value, and it says plus equal, and the compiler says you want to do a plus equal, but you didn't set it to anything to start with. So in order to use that plus equal aggregator function, you need to or aggregator operator, you need to initialize it to something. Okay. So then I have that. So now if I were to run this, my error goes away and it's working. Okay. So I'm going to go back and finish the average. So I've got my sum working. Here I'm going to say double average. Actually, let's do I'm going to calculate int average. Okay. And I'm going to say equals sum divided by 5d because I want it to do a double calculation, and then I'm going to put this in a math.round. Okay. So then it'll just round the average. Okay. And then I can do a console.writeLine. So my last thing so I just did here for the average. Oh, and now I need to do the letter. So I can say string letter equals determine grade average. Okay. Console.writeLine. The average is average and has a letter grade of letter. Okay. So now here, notice that here I had to define letter again. Okay, because I defined letter here inside the for loop. Once the for loop is over, letter is no longer defined. So I had to define that again. I could just go back and create do a string letter at the beginning before the for loop, and then use them both places. Either way. Okay. So now when we run this, what happens? Let's see. A local variable named letter cannot be declared in the scope. It's not going to let me use the same name in both places. So I'll just declare it here. String letter, and then I don't need it here. The compiler doesn't like that because it's confusing. Okay, I'm getting another error that says cannot convert type double to int. Are you missing a cast? Oh yeah, here. So that's on line 42, and I use the math.round method here, which math.round actually returns a double value, not an integer value. So if we look at C# math.round, if we look at the Microsoft documentation, we can see that I'm calling math.round with an integer, so I can go through here and find my, I can find my example here. So this is the one I'm calling, math.round, which with a double. Can you guys see that on the projector? So this is the function I'm calling, math.round. It takes one parameter, which is a double, and it returns a double. Okay. So in this case, I'm declaring average as an integer, but math.round is returning a double. So I need to do a conversion on that. Okay. So why do I want average to be an integer? Was that? Oh, I want it to be an integer because my determine grade method takes an integer argument, takes an integer parameter. So if average is a double, then that won't work for my determined grade. Okay. So I either need to make the grade double up here when I'm prompting the user. Okay, that would work. Or I need to do a round here on the average. Okay, which is typically how this works. When you're doing grade calculations, you're going to take all the grades, you're going to do an average, you're going to round it, and then you're going to plug that into the grade. So. And then it depends on the teacher if you get a round up or a round down, right? So truncation or rounding, 89.0001 rounds to 90, right? No. So, okay. All right. So what the problem is here is that I have this convert.math.round. I can do a conversion in two different ways. Okay. We can try the convert to int32. We'll see if that works. That's one option. I'm pretty sure that'll work on a double. Okay, so that works. Okay, so here if I'll just enter some grades to make sure that I get around, and so it says the average is 11. Sorry about that. And so it looks like I'm getting, my function is working, right? My logic is working. Another approach here that I could do is instead of doing convert.2and32, I could just do the inline cast that we did last time, and I could just do this, where I could say cast this to an int. Okay? And then that's also going to work. Okay? Average is an 88, has a grade of X. Okay? All right, so my main module is done. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and take out this pseudocode because I don't need it. I don't need it here in the module anymore. It's still at the top. Okay, it's still up here at the top, but I'm going to take out the copy of it just so it doesn't muddle up my code. Okay. All right. So now what's working is I have my main method with a for loop. I'm prompting for a user. I'm prompting the user for a grade. I'm setting the grade to my function. I'm getting a value back from my function, and I'm putting that in the message. Okay. So that's done. So now all I have to do is implement the range check in determine grade, and then I'm good. I am noticing here though that my output here is beginning to kind of run together a little bit, right? I've got a lot of lines here, and it looks kind of sloppy, and so maybe do you think it would be better if there was like a blank line, right here before enter grade number 2 or something? I mean that would be good, right? I think that would be good. Let's do that. I can do that in two ways. Okay. I can, if I just do here, so if I wanted a blank line after every time it says a number grade, a number grade of 100 has a letter grade of X. If I just want to put a blank line after each one of these lines, then what I can do is I can come into my code and I can just put another console.write line in there and just don't put anything in it. Okay? So now that's just going to write a blank line. Okay? So now we see that we've got a blank line here. Okay? That's one option. The other option is I can use a new line character. Okay? So the new line character here is going to be the backslash, and that's the slash that goes down from the left to the right, and then I can put an in. This is called escaping. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting an escaped character in my string, and the escape in here is a new line character. So it should insert a new line in my output. Okay, so I get the same result. So either way, a console.write line, or I can just put an escaped new line character. It is a backslash, so it goes down from the left to the right. Okay, as opposed to a slash, which goes, or the divide sign, which goes up from the left to the right. Okay, so it's the backslash. So it's on my keyboard, it's up on the right. It's on the same key as the pipe symbol that we use for the OR.
That's just within the console write line.
Yeah, so a backslash in is a string value, and it is a new line character. Okay, so it is printed on the console as a new line, which means that you're going to get a blank line in your output. Okay. There are other things you can escape. You can escape tabs and things like that. So if you wanted to space out your output, you could use a /t, which would put a tab in your output. Okay. But it has to make sure that it's inside the string. Okay. All right. So now I've got a little separation here of my code. So now let's go ahead and do the determine grade. Okay. So the determine grade is just these if statements, right? I'm not going to copy my pseudo here because I think it's pretty simple. So I'll just type it again. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of my return x here. I'm going to leave that actually for now. I'm going to start typing if grade less than or greater than or equal to 90. Is that what I did? Did I start at 90? Yeah, greater than or equal to 90. Then return A. Okay. If grade greater than or equal to 80. Okay, then return B. Okay. Then this return X, my stub, will just become the default. It'll be return F. Okay. So then I can compile this. I'm not finished yet, but I'm just going to compile it and make sure I'm doing it right. I've got no syntax errors. Oh, Replit, it's taking a minute. There we go. Enter grade. So if I enter a 100, I get a number grade of 100 has a grade of A. If I enter an 85, a number grade of 85 has a letter of B. If I do a 75, I'm still at F because I haven't done that if statement yet. Okay, but we're on the path here. So I'll just finish this if statement. I'm going to show you something else here that is a nice to know. If grade greater than or equal to 70, return a C. Okay, what do you notice about this if statement I did at line 55? It's got no blocks, right? But the code still compiles. But that if statement doesn't have any blocks. So if you have no blocks after your if statement, then the first line after the if statement is the block. Okay? So if you have a single line if statement, you can leave the blocks out. But it is bad practice to do so. Okay? Because because now if you say, oh, I want to do a return C, I want to do this other thing, and I'm going to say, and I'm going to put logic here that says, write grade, to a database. Okay, and now I've added a line. That would be actual code, not a comment. But so I've added something. Now my if statement is wrong, right? Because I've added something and I left the blocks out, and so now I've made a mistake. Okay, so leaving those blocks out will save you a little bit of it'll save you, 2 characters in your code, might save you 1 line because you don't have to have this closing block, but it's gonna come back and hurt you later. Okay, so I recommend that you don't do that. Okay, but know that it's there. There was years ago there was an error in iOS, had to do with the way that a particular application down within the operating system on the iPhones was validating the security certificate that it was using for encryption, and the error was that the certificate wasn't being validated, right? So the certificate wasn't being used properly, and so after the fact, Apple released the details of the bug, and it was this: a developer had a single line if statement to validate their certificate. They'd come back and added extra code, and wound up skipping the certificate validation. So that made it out into iPhone land, right? So it compiled, right, and that was not written in C, so that was written in Java, but it's the same, or probably C, or probably Objective C, or C++. It's the same in those. Okay, so I'm just going to finish greater than or equal to 60, block, return D, and then I have my default, which is return F. So now if I run this, if I get 100, I get a 90, I get an 89, I get a B, I get an 80, should be a B, I get a 79, I'm at a C. I can run it again to do a couple more tests. If I get a 70, I still have a C, a 69. It's going to be a D. See how I'm testing right on those boundaries? 70 and a 69 should have different values. I could test 70, 71, 72, 73, but I'm really just interested in inputs where the output's going to change. Okay, the value that's right before and right after the boundary. Okay, here's a 60, here's a 59, and then anything less than a 59 is still going to be F. Okay, all right, so that's done. Any questions?
Mine's not working.
Yours doesn't work. Well, I'm
But
sorry.
It says the same thing you said. Primary constructor body is not allowed.
So that means that your statement, your definition of determined grade, is outside the main class. You put it in the wrong place. So read your message again. The error message. It says primary constructor body is not allowed, and that means that. So what's happened here is, if you look at my example, so in my example, the class ends here at line 64, okay, and I have my determined grade is inside that class. But if I end the class here, so I'm just going to end the class. I'm going to get rid of this here, so of that close brace. So now this is the ending of my class. So if we go back and look, this is the closing bracket on the definition of my class. So now if I run this, I should get that same error you got. Unexpected symbol. Actually, I got something else. But the point is that what you've done is you've put your method in the wrong place, either outside the class. Possibly you've put it. So I'll go ahead and put that back. Possibly it's wrong here. So if I move that value, okay. So now this bracket, this brace is now the end of my main method. Okay, and I can see how they're matched. So now my definition of my determined grade is now inside the main method, right? Which is incorrect. It needs to be inside the class, but not inside any other method. So if I run this, I'm going to get another similar error. Okay, whole bunch of errors. Here's that one: primary constructor is not allowed. That's the one you're getting. Plus, I'm getting a whole lot of others. Okay, but the mistake you've made is that your blocks are out of balance somehow. Okay. So go through and look at those. See if you can find where it's out of balance. Okay. Right. So if you put your cursor there on main class, where's the closing time of the class? Okay, so that's correct. Okay. So now put it. Just go one by one. Put your right there on main.
So that ends that.
Okay. So that is that,
Right.
and then check these. Okay, so that's the for loop. That's good. Sitting there, right? So let's try it again and see. Did you change something before? Yeah. So now the message says primary constructor is not allowed, and it's at line 37. Oh, it's because you have an extra semicolon.
That's why.
It's always a semicolon.
Geez.
Okay. So now unexpected symbol, line 67. You missed a semicolon after return. Okay, so
What's a semicolon?
what Yesre had was a third example of that, which is she mistakenly put a semicolon right there. So right at the end of her definition of her main method, which if you put a semicolon there, definition over, right? So the block is no longer part of the definition. Okay, so now when you run it, she's getting primary constructor body is not allowed, which basically says, look, this block here that I've defined, starting at this point, going down to this point at line 46, that block is now not inside a method. It's inside the class, but it doesn't have the context of a method around it. Okay, because I have this extra semicolon right here. Okay, same thing happens on the for loop, by the way. If you put the for loop there, then this block is now outside of the for loop and will only run one time. Okay, so if we run that, this will compile. Okay, but I enter my oops. When I run it, REPL's a little slow today. Is this point where REPL reloads itself and your heart kind of skips a beat
Right.
because you're like, oh no, did my code get saved?
Luckily, it's saving
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, every now and then this site can struggle a little bit, but it's pretty rare.
everything. Now it's saying
I don't know what's happened here to my REPL. Did I lose my internet connection? I hope not, because I kind of need that.
yeah, it failed to connect.
Yeah,
There it goes.
here we go. So I'm just going to load this REPL up in another window. There we go. Okay. So now when I run this, it's because I have this extra semicolon in there. In this case, it's saying that counter is not defined because I'm trying to use it in an output statement here, and it's defined only within the block of the for loop, and because I've terminated the for loop there, it's no longer defined. So you got to be careful with those extra semicolons. Okay, because they can cause you some trouble.
Got that.
That is just me pressing keys by mistake.
Sometimes it'll do that.
Yeah.
It'll let us get a couple of keys.
Okay. Yeah, so if you like press the, I press some arrow keys in there or something, and then I get funky numbers because any key you press when it's doing that read line goes into the string, and so if they're not all digits, so even an arrow key or a space or something like that will cause that to fail. That's actually going to be next week's work is input validation, right? Which you can avoid this error by doing input validation, which is by not assuming that the user typed a string and doing tests on it to make sure that it, or by not assuming the user typed a correct integer, doing tests on it to make sure that they typed an actual valid value. And you're going to love that because it adds several lines of code to everything you do. So, okay, so I think this is done. So week 5 here is complete. Okay, so that was my solution. Your solution should have been similar. Didn't have to be exact, but it should have been very similar. Okay. Any questions?
Can I see the bottom?
There you go. And you can find this in my Replit library, which everybody knows how to find, right? Does anybody not know how to find the Replit library? No. Okay. You guys ready?
Just for the, I was just gonna ask, just for the troubleshooting what was going on.
Expected symbol. So start at the top. Always, whenever you're going to debug, you have multiple error messages here. So just so just solve one. And solve it. So here, your counter equal and your for loop should be counter plus plus, because that's the incrementer. Okay. So here the error was at line 31. So I just go look at line 31 and just see if I can figure out what's wrong. So now you fixed one. Now run it again to see what happens. Whenever you have multiple errors like this, you always just want to solve one at a time and then execute. Sometimes you'll make a change and you'll get rid of more than one error. Okay. So now at line 35, unexpected symbol A. Okay. And it's because you've got notice how your coloring is off.
Yeah,
that's on the grade. It's because you've missed a close brace or a close quote right here at the end of line 32. So the editor is telling you that all of this it's trying to interpret it as part of the string in your right line. Okay. So you need to put a close quote there. No, just no. Okay. And then the parentheses. Okay. And so you notice how this code is turned back to line. Okay. Yeah. So just one at a time. Just keep knocking it out. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so mine's slightly different, but it's similar as well.
Cannot implicitly insert type strings in it. So it can't. So line 46.
So right here is because I if here, letter grade is straight, and then I'm trying to.
Well, so what you're doing here is you're saying sum plus equal letter grade, but you want to sum the numeric grade. So here this should be test score, not letter grade. Letter grade is the letter that you're putting out, but the test score variable is the number that they made, right? So you want to aggregate the numbers, not the letters. Okay. Let's talk about arrays. Anybody else? Micah, Jonathan, Kazim, Joseph? Okay. Let's go back and talk about arrays. So we did some discussion last week. I'm just going to run through this again real quick. Arrays are essentially having a single value, a single variable that can hold multiple values. Okay. So in this case, on the screen, we have an array defined. The array is called scores. Oops. The array is called scores. We've defined it with 10 elements. The elements are indexed 0 through 9. Okay. And this is the value of scores at 0, has a value of 100. Scores at 3 has a value of 87. And you can see our notation here using the square brackets. Okay. So when we define an array, each of the elements in the array can be used just like any other variable. Okay. And we use the square bracket notation to say what kind of which one we want to use, which element in the array we want to use. Okay. The elements inside the array have to be all the same type. Okay. In C#, the elements in the array have to be all the same type. So once I define an array of integer, that means every element in the array is going to be an integer. Okay. I can't have an array with mixed data types in C#. Okay. We said the data type of the array is an array of integer. or an array of string. The data type of the element is an int or a string. Okay? So the array itself, when I'm defining that array, I use a different data type than we have been using currently to define a variable. Okay? So here, when I define scores, okay, the data type for my definition of scores is integer array, which I'm notating it's an int, and I'm notating that it's an array using the square brackets. Okay? So what's the data type of scores here? Array of integer. What's the data type of score at 0? Score at 1. That's an integer, right? So the elements are integers. The array has a data type of array of integers, okay? Which means that you can't like say, variable plus equals array, right? You can't, because the array doesn't have a plus, right? That you can't add it like you would a number. You have to add the elements, not the whole array, okay? You can sum them up using a for loop, right? And then also the array itself has some properties and methods. So you can get the length of the array, and so so that scores here, because it has a data type of array of integer, has some built-in functions and some built-in methods that you can use. Okay, so we talked about definition and initialization. If I use this notation, I can declare scores as an array of integer, and then I create it using the new keyword. It's a new integer array with 10 elements. Okay, at this point I have an array of 10 elements. Each element is initialized to the default value of the data type of the array. In this case, it's int. The default value is 0. Okay. Here I can also use this list notation to initialize an array. Here I say this is an integer array. It's called scores. I wanted to set it to a new array of integer, but instead of giving it the number of elements, here I can use the list notation and give it the value of each element. Okay, so in this case I get an array of 6 elements. The 0th element is 100. The first element is 96. 97 is the second, etc. Okay, and again this is the 0th element because array counters start at 0. So if I have an array of 10 elements, the indices are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So I will often use that term, the 0th element, okay? Because the first element is actually this 96. That's element number 1, okay? Technically 100 is the first element because it's the first one in the list, but I think it gets confusing when we talk about the first element versus element number 1. I think in our discussion in the class, that should be the same thing, right? So I will refer to this to the first occurrence, the element that occurs first, as the 0th element, and then the first element will be this one, the second element will be this one, etc. Okay. Okay. So lastly, once you define an array that can't be made any bigger. So if you define an array of 10, that array is 10. It's going to have 10 elements in it. You cannot make it 11 elements. If you define it as a new array of 11 elements, the old array of 10 elements is gone. It doesn't exist any longer. And whatever is in it is gone. Okay? You get this index out of range exception if you attempt to use an element of the array that is not defined. So if I define an array of 10 and I try to say array at element 10, I'm going to get an index out of range exception because the indices are 0 through 9. Okay? It's likewise, if I attempt to use an array element of -1 or something like that, I'm also going to get an index out of range exception. Okay? And you can tell how many elements are in an array using the length property. Okay, this is a property because it has no parentheses. Okay, so normally when we use built-in functions, they would have parentheses, an open and closed parentheses right after them. In this case, scores.length is a property of the array, so we don't need the parentheses. Okay. Let's see. So we're going to do some examples. This is a for loop that we'll use to iterate over an array. We use that terminology to iterate over an array means we're going to write a for loop, and the contents of the for loop is going to do something to each element in the array. And we call that iterating over an array, or iterate an array, or iterate over an array. So we'll use those terms to mean write a for loop and do something to each element. Okay. You can also have the shorthand notation for each. You can use a for loop, okay, like on this slide, or you can use a for each loop on this slide, okay? And we'll do some experimentation with this shortly. You also have some built-in methods here that will help you. You have an array.sort. Notice this isn't scores.sort, okay? It's array.sort and then scores, okay? Because in this case, the sorting algorithm is not built into the array itself. It's not built into the scores array. It's built into the array class in C#, okay? So notice I'm using here the array class, big A, uppercase array, just like I use console or convert. So that's a static class that I can use that gives me a lot of array functionality, sort being one of them, okay? So in this case, I don't say scores.sort, I use array.sort, and then I pass in the array that I want to sort.
So if there's a string array, it's going to sort alphabetically.
The string array would sort alphabetically, case sensitive. Okay, so the you have to be careful when you're sorting strings. Okay,
Which is
we can do a little test. We'll do a little test here, but I would expect that you would get lowercase characters first. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I haven't actually sorted a string array in C# in a while, so it might actually do case sensitive match there. But we're gonna do a test, so we'll find out. Okay. But if you were to alphabetize normally as string values, the lowercase characters would be alphabetized before the uppercase characters. So A through Z lowercase would sort before A through Z uppercase. Okay. We'll do a test. Okay, so then we also have this string.join that we can use if we have an array and we want to see what's in it because we're debugging or we want to print it out somehow. We can use the string.join, where again the string is a static class that gives us a bunch of functions that we can use on string values. Okay, in this case, string.join takes an array or a list and joins all the elements in the array, puts a comma between each one, and prints it out. So if this line console.writeLine string.join, comma scores would yield this value. Okay.
is the comma the only way you can join?
No, you can put any value. You can put any characters you want here. So you could put comma space if you wanted. So you could have a nice space. You could put a dash. You could put an uppercase D. I mean, you could put whatever you want in there. Whatever makes sense in the join.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, like, what's how like phone numbers if they were put in.
Yeah. You could join in other ways, whatever you want. Okay. Not surprisingly, there's a split function as well. So given a comma delimited list like this, I can split it into an array, which we'll get into that when we start doing CSV files. Okay. Because this row here kind of looks like a line in a CSV file, comma separated values. So string.join, you put them together, and then there's a split function that you can take them apart. Okay. We also have something called a list, which we'll introduce in coming weeks. But a list and an array are very similar. They have a lot of the same functionality. The key difference is that a list you can make bigger and smaller. So I can take an array and I can build it, but I can't make it bigger. If I define it as 10, it's permanently 10. A list, when I define the list and create the list here, a new list, it actually has 0 entries, and then I can add entries to the list. I can remove entries from the list, and the length of the list goes up and down.
So
We-
that's the difference between a list and an array.
The primary difference is that a list is dynamically sizable, right? I can add more elements to it after I define it.
Sure.
Okay. There are some other differences as well, but for our purposes, that's really why we're going to be using lists of arrays. We're starting with arrays now, but we will get to use lists in the future. Yes, sir.
I see the word dynamic a lot. Can you give me the basic computer terms?
So in this case, dynamic means that it can be changed. Okay, in this particular context. So an array is not dynamic; it's static. Okay, once you create an array of 10 elements, you can each element is dynamic. I can change that value, but the array itself is static at 10. Okay, the list is dynamic because I create a list. When I run this command new list of integer, my list is empty. I have a list of 0 elements. Okay, so now when I add one, I can do list.add, and now I have a list of 1 element. Okay, I can then do list.remove, and now I have again a list of 0 elements. So that makes it dynamic. So the list itself can become longer or shorter, and also we call it unordered because the list I can change the elements around. So I can say take element number 7 in the list and move it to come after element number 2, right? Which then changes all of the indices of all those arrays. And so now that list is considered unordered now because you have no guarantee that if you're manipulating the elements in the list that they're not changing orders. Okay, if you don't manipulate them, then they stay in the same order. But you can. It's unordered because you can manipulate that. Okay, but we're gonna talk about lists after spring break. So stick with arrays for now. Okay, but I wanted to bring that up because all the things you're gonna dislike about arrays, you're gonna love about lists. So okay. This is parallel, so this is assignment 6B, which we pushed out the due date on. This is a parallel list. 6B uses parallel lists. So here we say that arrays or lists are parallel if we have 2 arrays and the first element or the 0th element in each is related to each other. The first element in each is related to each other. So in this case, assignments, this is the name of the assignment. This is the grade. So the assignment at 0 is project 1. So the grade for project 1 is going to be at grades 0, which is 100. The 0, 1, the second, the number 2 element here is project 3. It's going to be a grade of 90 here. So we say they're parallel because they're the same length, and the index and each element at each index is related to the matching index in the other array. Okay, so we'll use this to create data structures. In this case, think of this as like the collection of grades for a student. Okay, that's the data set that we're maintaining here. Okay, all of the names of the assignments and the grades for an individual student. Okay, here's another example where we have 3 arrays. So in this case, we have the name of the salespeople, the number of sales that salesperson made, and the total sales dollars. So these are 3 parallel arrays. The first, second, third, fourth element in each one of these is going to be related to the other. So in this case, Roberto is element number 2. Roberto had 32 sales, 87.65 in dollars. Okay, so we say it's parallel because those elements are related to each other.
Wait, you said Roberto's element number 2?
Roberto is element number 2. It's the third element, but it's index number 2.
0, 1, 2.
So 0, 1, 2, right? So see what I'm saying? I should call it second, 0th, first, second. So that's where the 0th comes in. You feel dumb saying it, but it helps, right? Okay. Multi-dimensional arrays, which we're not going to talk about today. Okay. So let's do some examples. Let's solve this one. So create an array of month names, ask the user for a number between 1 and 12, and print the matching month name. Okay. So what kind of array are we going to create? So it looks like we have an example here. Console at right line month at index 2 should print February. Right? That's actually not correct. Actually, that is correct. Well, it depends on how you build the array.
Starting 1.
Yeah, we're starting at 1. Yeah, so okay. So what kind of array is month? What's the data type of month?
Parallel.
What was that? It's not parallel. It's going to be a single array. It's a string array. It's an array of strings. Okay, month is an array of strings because it has the month names in it. Okay, so if I say month at element 2 is going to print out February, okay, then February is a string, okay, and so month must contain an array of strings, okay.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and do some REPL. Did you have a question, Yezere? Or?
You're gonna have to minus one though in order to get
We're going to have to do something about that index, right? Let's see. So this is week 6 in class month names. Then we're going to have to do something here because this says month at 2 prints February, right? But if we start January, February, February would be in the first position, not the second position, right? And so the first element, not the second element. So we're going to have to figure out what to do there. So let's just, first things first, let's just get our array going. Okay? So I wanted to find a string array, so I say string array. Okay? Month equals new string array. Okay, so I could say it's a string array of 12. Okay? And then I could add it, or I'm going to use the list initializer. Okay? January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. No, you can abbreviate these if you want, just to save time. December, okay, and I'm done. So now if I say console.writeLine and I say month at 2, what am I going to get? I'm going to get March, right? Okay. Okay. So here, in order to make that work, I can just put a blank element right there at the beginning. So now the 0th element is just an empty string. So now when I run, I get February. Now in the real world, you would say you want month at 2 because 2 is a human readable number there, right? So if I were to prompt the user, what month do you want to see the value for? They would say, show me the name of the second month. Then you should take the user is putting in a 2. So now I have to translate that contextually into a 0-based list. The users start counting at 1. So anytime you prompt a user for a number, you typically want them to enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you're matching that to an array, you need to do the internal conversion yourself to 0-based counting. Okay? As well as when you put that out. So anytime you're dealing with arrays or lists that are using 0-based counting, and you're interacting with a human that has a 1-based counting, you need to make an accommodation to that. Okay? And we'll get some more examples of how that will take place. You will not have to worry about that in this week's assignment. Okay? So that was pretty exciting. Made an array and printed out. What was that? Yep. It's exhilarating, not exciting. That's even better. Okay.
So there's supposed to be open close parentheses beforehand,
Where
before January.
that is a curly brace. Because I'm creating an array, and I'm initializing it using the string initialization notation.
After that, those are two.
This is a curly brace, and then a list of strings, comma delimited strings. Those are quotes, yeah. Yes, it's not one string, it's multiple strings. Each element is a separate string. Yeah, because what you're initializing there, and that's a list. That what comes after a string there, the curly brace, empty string, January, February, March, that's a list. Okay? So so when we create a new list of string, that's what the representation would be, right? So that is, we'll talk about those more after spring break. And this line 5 here, this is all one line, okay? It's just wrapped. So make sure when you're typing it that you're typing it all as a single line. See, you're getting some color code out there. You're missing a close quotes after the number. Yeah, so you're missing a close quote here after number. See, that's why December's a different color. See, there you go. See, the color coding is telling you something. Okay. Let's do another one. We have 30 minutes left.
Keep it on the
I have a question about this right to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's a great one to where the person puts in the number. Is there is there a console read line which you're then requesting that and then it'll automatically print it, or you just still have to do the console read line?
When you console.readline takes what's entered on the console and returns it as a string value. It doesn't echo it back. So if you want to echo it back to the console, you would have to do that yourself. Right? Okay. All right. So let's do this. Create an array of int. Prompt the user to enter 5 integers. Store each integer in the array. Use string.join to print the array. Use a loop and calculate the average of the array elements. Okay. All right. So this has a lot of similarities to your homework assignment on the random number generator. Okay, in that we're going to create an array. In our homework assignment, instead of prompting the user, we're going to use a random number generator to fill in the array. Okay, so instead of console.readline, we'll just do random.next, right? Which we did an example on Tuesday. So if you go back to Tuesday's lecture material, you can see that.
Well, you just uploaded.
It was uploaded, yeah, and also, there's in the homework assignment, there's some code that will tell you how to use the random number generator. Okay, so let's do this one. So create an array of int, prompt the user to enter 5 integers, store each integer in the array. So use string.join to print the array. Use a for loop to calculate the average of the array elements. Okay, so let's do the first part first. Create an array of int, prompt the user for 5 integers, put it in the array. Let's just do that part. Okay, and then we'll fill in the rest. So this is going to be C#, week 6 in class, array input by user. Okay. Okay, let's just get rid of our hello world there. Give us a little space. Okay, so now the first thing first is declare an array. Integer, array of numbers, and we're going to say it's a new integer array, and it's going to have 5 elements in it. Okay? So now instead of using the list initialization, I'm just creating an empty array. 5 elements, they're all initialized to 0. Okay. For loop for int counter equals 0. Counter less than or equal to less than 5. Counter plus plus. Okay, now here I'm going to use my counter as the index for storing the value that the user puts in. So in this case, I want it to match the array indices 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Because I've created an array of 5 elements index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So on the counter, when I do my for loop, I want to make sure that I start at 0 and I end at 5. Okay? And actually, in this case, I don't want to end at 5. I want to end at numbers.length. Okay? And it's less than numbers.length. This is a mistake that you're going to run into. You're going to want to put less than or equal here, and you're going to get an index out of range exception. Okay? So we want always less than the length. Start at 0, less than the length. Okay? And I could just use the number 5 here instead of numbers.length, but if I change my mind and say I want to do an array of 10, okay, then all I have to do is change my index definition to 10, and it's done. So I don't, by using numbers.length, it's always just going to run the for loop for however many, once for every element in the array. Okay? So I'm kind of iterating through the array here. So now we're going to say console.writeLine, enter an integer. Then now I'm going to store it. So my input would be, it's going to be convert.2and32, console.readline, right? But I'm going to store it right in the array. So I'm just going to say numbers at counter equals convert.2and32 console.readline. Okay. So I'm not, we were doing like, int number here as in our other for loops, but here I'm just going to put it straight into the array. So I don't need to define another holding variable. I already defined the holding variables. I defined 5 of them all at once right here. They're all named number, and then I address one with the indice, in this case counter, which will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as the loop runs. Okay, let's run this and see what happens. Should prompt me for 5 numbers. Integer 8, 90, 76, 0, minus 5. Okay, and the program is done. Okay, so I know it put it in the array. I can't tell that it put it in the array from the user's perspective because we didn't display any data. Okay. But we built an array and we put a for loop and we're letting the user populate the array. Okay. So now let's do let's print it out. So let's do console.writeLine. And let's just say I'm going to write string.join with the comma, and I'm going to join numbers. Okay. Run that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I get string.join 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I wanted to space them out a little bit, I could do comma space. Now when I enter those, I get a little space in between each one. I could do double dash. Whatever I put in there is just going to be inserted in between the values. Okay? Everybody with me?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So will it ever be public dynamic void?
Instead of public static void?
Yeah.
No, it will never be that. What will happen is in following semesters, when you start getting into object-oriented programming, you'll just get rid of the static. It will just be public void. Okay. Actually, the main method will always be public static void, but you will write other methods. You don't change the static to something else. You just don't use it. But in this class, we won't do that. We're always going to use public static in this class. Okay, everybody with me?
I've got an error.
You got an error?
Yes.
We'll fix it.
I'm trying. I'm working.
What is your error? Do you know what it is?
Yeah, it's okay. So
No, no.
we're going
I gotta get back to basic math. My rules.
You misspelled link, and it's capital,
Capital.
and it's misspelled also.
yeah, it's a little.
Excellent. Okay, we'll give you those messages. Oh, they- you have to look at it. Oh, that's a small issue. It's supposed to be capital. This is my link. This is-
So if you're using Visual Studio or VS Code, then if you're making a syntax error as you're typing, it will highlight it. It'll highlight the line with a little squiggly.
Well, you can do this one, just Google the error.
Yeah, so if you just take that error and just cut and paste it in Google, you'll get some guidance.
That way it knows.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, there's, you know, nobody's going to write big projects in Replit, right? I mean, there are actually quite a few people that have done some really impressive work here in Replit, but it's really done so that it's easy to share online. But
Is there other ones just like this that are more?
there are others, yeah. There's an editor called CodeZinger that some of the other classes use. That's a really nice tool. It's not free though, and so Replit is free, which is why I like it. CodeZinger, you'd have to get a subscription to CodeZinger, which, you know, you're already paying enough. If this was Harvard, I'd get two, right? But you know, at SAC we're trying to control our costs, and so and CodeZinger and Replit is good enough for what we're doing. CodeZinger is a nice tool, but and we could also run this on using Visual Studio or VS Code, but then if we do that, it's harder to. Those are local on your computer, and so it's harder to do work on a lab machine during class, and then you have to take it home with you somehow and all that. So Replit, it just solves all those problems, and it makes you have to learn the language and the constructs. If you use VS Code or Visual Studio, one of those IDEs, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, those tools have a lot of syntax help. They'll guide you as you start typing a command. It has great predictive typing, but those are very useful. The downside is that when you're brand new, if you have those crutches in place, those tools in place, you don't always learn the basics, right? And so using Replit really gets you to where you really have a good understanding of the syntax and the structure. And then when you get into the IDE, you already know what's going on, and it just moves you. You can move very fast with development there. But you know, I like to build that base foundation of knowledge about the syntax. Okay, we're almost done here. So the last thing is we want to print out the sum. Okay, so let's do. I'm gonna write a method to print out the sum. Console.writeLine. Sum is, I'm just going to put my interpolation in there. Sum is, and I'm going to say sum array numbers. Okay. So here's what I've done is I'm calling an array. I'm calling a method called sum array, and I'm sending the array as a parameter, as an argument. Okay. So because the array is a variable, it's a data type of integer array. I can also send that as an argument. I can receive it as a parameter. I can send it back as the resulting data type of a function if I want to. That array is a data type just like any other, and I can use it just like I would int or string or boolean. Okay. So here I have an interpolation, so I have a string, sum is, and then in this value I'm going to replace it with the value, with the result of this function. Whoops. Okay. So let's go ahead and write that function. Public static. What's the return type of the sum array? It's going to be an integer, right? It's called sum array. It has one parameter, and what is the data type of the parameter? I'm sending numbers. What is the data type of numbers? Integer array. Okay. So here in my parameter definition, I say integer array, and I'll just call it an array. Okay. So let's stub it, make sure that I got my output correctly. So here I'm just going to return -1, just to stub it, just so that I can compile it and run it. And I got a syntax error. Okay, I did the stub because I want to make sure I didn't have any syntax errors in what I had typed. So my syntax error is I missed a parenthesis right here. So I open a parenthesis here to call some array and send the argument, and I forgot to close it. Okay. So now it says sum is -1, which is obviously not true. Okay. All right. So now let's actually do the sum. So how do we sum an array? We'll just iterate over the array and add up all the elements. Okay. So when I say iterate over an array, what does that tell you we're going to write? We're going to write a for loop, right? So I'm going to say int sum equals 0. We've done summations a bunch of times. For int I equals 0, I less than an array dot length. I plus plus. Okay. Sum plus equal an array at position I. Okay. Return sum. Done. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sum is 25. Yes, sir.
That's where my problem.
Right here on line 11.
Yeah.
So this is we've been calling the string interpolation, and this is another form of that. Okay. What I was calling interpolation up to this point is not actually interpolation. It's a type of string formatting. But this is identical to, say, if I were to do int sum equals sum array numbers. Okay. And then I could say console.writeLine sum is plus sum. Okay. So there I can just do concatenation. Okay. I can do this composite formatting. Okay. Like that. Or I can do this interpolation. So in this case, any of these, those are all the same output. So basically, these are just different ways that I can format a string. Okay. So this is using concatenation. So I take this string and I use the plus sign, which when I'm dealing with strings becomes concatenation instead of addition. And I say take this string, take this value sum, convert it to a string, and append it to the end of this string. I can use this composite formatting where I can say I'm going to give you this special value, inside the curly braces, and in this case, and then I provide a list at the end of my console.writeLine. So this is actually a list that I put in here, and this is the 0th element in that list. Okay, using sum. And so this is what we've done this several times in the prior weeks, and then I really just introduced this structure this week, which is this is actually interpolation. I was calling this interpolation, but it's really called composite formatting. And so this is all is actual interpolation. In Python, this might be called an F string. And it's going to have which is an interpolation step, but it's going to have a slightly different structure in each language. But every language has some kind of interpolation structure built in. Okay, so it's just a quick way to create a composite string. It's a shorthand for creating a composite string. Yeah. Okay, let's do the average. You're gonna love this. Console.WriteLine. Average is let's do an interpolation. Average is average array numbers.
That one symbol is repair the entire installation of it.
This right here, this dollar sign. This dollar sign means that this is an interpolated string, right? And so which means that it'll support this functionality of putting variable names inside the curly braces. Okay, and that's really the difference between this composite formatting here on line 14 and the interpolation is really just the string, and that tells the compiler run the interpolation instead of looking for the list of variables. Okay, and it's great. I mean, I like it because it makes the code easier to read. When you get into these very complex strings, when you're putting together a lot of numbers, when combining them with variables and things,
Sure.
using that interpolation is very good. Okay, so let's do the average. So I've declared a new method here called average array. Okay, and notice, when I'm creating methods or functions in my code, almost all the time, I actually write the calling statement for the function before I actually write the signature of the function. Have you noticed that? That's not by mistake. I always write the call of the function here, the consumer, which in this case is line 15, average array. I'm always going to write that first because I want the name of the function to make sense in the context of the calling block. So I'm going to write it here. I'm going to write the call to the function basically as a way of testing, do I like the name? Does it make sense the way I'm setting the parameters? Okay, so I'm actually helping to design the function signature by using it first. Okay, so I do that very intentionally, where I'll call the function before I define the signature. Let's define the signature. Public static, the average is going to be a double, right? This is called average array, and it takes an integer array called an array. Okay, how do we calculate the average of the array? What should we do?
I'll call this one.
Call the sum, right? I could write a for loop here, right? But so what I want to take the sum of the array and divide it by the elements in the array. So I could write a for loop here, just like I did and recalculate the sum, but I don't need to because I already have it. So I'm just going to say return sum array an array divided by an array dot length. Okay. But I've got a problem here with integer division, right? And so I need to cast one of these because I want this to be double. I need to cast one of these to be double. So I can use an inline cast. Otherwise, I would get a truncated integer because of integer division in C#. Okay. So there we go. 10, 12, 89, 100. A big number. Okay. There we go. Yes, sir.
You did the double on the average.
Mhm.
Why?
I used to double here because because averages are, if I take a bunch of integers and divide them, I'm
Okay,
I'm going to get a decimal precision, right? So if I used int there, I would lose the decimal precision, right?
Okay.
Okay, because the average is never going to, is rarely going to be an even integer. It's probably going to be some decimal number.
Then what would happen if you were trying to compile it like that and it wasn't able to do the math right? So what would the output look like?
What do you mean here? If I didn't include this inline cast, then the math here would just be 334809. The 0.4 would just be truncated. It would just disappear.
So in C# when dealing with decimals, decimal place, you use the words like float, double, decimal.
We're going to use double. Okay, float, double, and decimal all have decimal precision,
Okay.
and they are very similar to each other. But we're going to use double.
Gotcha.
Double is kind of the default in C# for numbers with decimal precision.
Okay.
And they each one of those data types has a little bit of different attributes to it, so they're very similar.
Of each other, right? So they're
Yeah.
very similar.
And some of the math functions are different for floats and decimals, and some of the way that it handles precision on really long decimal, 80, 80, 90, 100, 1,000 decimal points, places.
Sure.
The precision handling gets a little different there. And some of the math functions are different. What did you want to see, Israel? Which part of the code?
Oh, no,
Oh,
I just
okay.
want to make sure I lined it up right.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all I have for today. So, any questions? Okay. All right. So I'll post this video, and you can watch it again if you want to.